Hi everyone. Today I'm continuing on with my discussions of recent Criterion releases. I'm a little bit late with this one, the Barnes & Noble sale. I'm filming this on the 29th and the 28th was the final day of the Barnes & Noble sale. I had wanted to get this in a couple days ago, but there were so many supplements and I wanted to go through all the supplements before I made a video on Malcolm X. And this is the 4K UHD version in glorious Dolby Vision. I love Dolby Vision in the movie theater, and I love it on physical releases as well. 1992 movie directed by Spike Lee, and in an astonishing, amazing performance by Denzel Washington as Malcolm X. And it follows Malcolm X's lifetime. He was, I think, just shy of his 40th birthday, but we see little bits and pieces of his childhood, his father murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. But we basically see four different elements in the transformation of Malcolm X. He's as a teenager, young adult, he is a gangster in Boston, drug user. He's on the fast track to death, and he had served as, we get a scene where he's serving as working as a porter on a train, kowtowing to his white bosses and the white patrons. So he drifts into gangsterhood, eventually gets caught, goes to prison for many years, and he has a jailhouse conversion, not to Christianity, but to Islam, and specifically the Nation of Islam, as it was run by Elijah Muhammad. And he takes it very seriously. This is an intense conversion. But as the years go by, his close relationship with Elijah Muhammad is somewhat ruptured by the jealousy of the other ministers. Malcolm X has become the chief minister. Malcolm X says something which is considered very insensitive when President Kennedy was assassinated. Elijah Muhammad picks up on the pretext that you were too insensitive and you're going to be silenced for 3 months, but then it seems this silencing has become indefinite. So Malcolm X leaves the Nation of Islam, and which is basically forms his own Islamic ministry, and this is intolerable to the Nation of Islam. And Malcolm X also makes a hajj to Mecca, in which he sees the world in a totally different way. He had been a separatist. He was not for integration. He was for separation of the blacks, and sort of a Pan-Africanism, which his father was also a minister and was influenced by Marcus Garvey and the return to Africa. That white people would never accept them. It was a lost cause to try to feel like we can live with the white people. But then after his trip to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, he does very much modify his views on that, and he even shakes the hand of Martin Luther King, who he was sort of the opposite of Martin Luther King. So we get a lot of Malcolm X's life, and it's 3.5 hours long. And there were times, and I'd never seen the film before, and I was curious as to why this wasn't a more praised film as far as awards went, and especially the Academy Awards. Denzel Washington didn't win for Best Actor that year. It went to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman. I love Al Pacino, but I mean, that's an Al Pacino mugging performance. This is a monumental performance. Performance for the ages. But it is, like I say, at 3.5 hours, it was a bit lumbering, and I was kind of surprised how conventional it was in in its style. It almost seemed kind of anachronistic. This was a Hollywood biopic. Well, it was a $30 million movie made for a big studio. Certainly they couldn't do a whole lot of kind of revolutionary kind of storytelling. But in the opening scene with the credits, it's so incendiary. It's one of Malcolm X's more incendiary speeches. As in the background of this giant American flag, a la Patton in George C. Scott in the movie Patton, and we see the American flag burning. We might be led to believe that this is going to be a really, this might have a very kind of revolutionary approach, but it doesn't. And Spike Lee was a film student at NYU and knew film history at the back of his hand. He talks about stealing shots from Billy Wilder. I was really reminded of Vincent Minnelli. And both Minnelli and Spike Lee have a real talent for melodrama. But especially in the opening sequences where we go from this incendiary opening to kind of like almost a comic mode, there is changes of tones, and they're very deliberate throughout the film. But all of this is tied together by Denzel Washington's fantastic performance, and he is a tragic character. He seemed like he was advocating violence, but he never actually participated in violence, and he never really incited any specific violence. And he was a true believer in this, in Islam and its doctrines. It changed his life. So his ultimate dismissal by the Nation of Islam, which was basically caused when he discovered that Elijah Muhammad was not, as far as his sexual life, he discovered that Elijah Muhammad had like 9 children by 5 different women, teenage secretaries. He was outraged by that because it was so against his precepts that he took very seriously. So we see that through the whole performance. This is the transformation of a man who finds meaning in his life, who finds self-respect. The message that he was giving to other people was one that he really believed in himself, that you can transform yourself, you can you can find meaning in your life, that you're an important person. You're not a second-class citizen, which is what white people wanted black people to feel. And and he had great charisma. He had almost immediately he could grab your attention. But he struck terror in the hearts of white people. And he says, I don't think it's in the film, but it might be in other supplements. Malcolm X says that I really boosted Martin Luther King in the eyes of white people because they were so terrified of me, whereas Martin Luther King, with his separatistness and his defense of violence, but always in self-defense. He always made that distinction. Whereas Martin Luther King, with his Christian vision of brotherhood, turning the other cheek, was far more palatable to white people. I remember Malcolm X very clearly. I was about 16 years old when he was assassinated, and I lived right outside New York City. And I was very much into what was called an educational TV, Channel 13 in New York City. And Malcolm X would be on television quite often. And I was in a white right-wing family. My father was about as right-wing as you could get for the 1960s. But he didn't monitor what I watched on TV because he was always sleeping in his chair. So I got to watch, and I even remember Elijah Muhammad being on television as well. But the other part of the part of Malcolm X that I wish I knew more of, or not knew more of, but I get a better sense of it. I kind of got from a book, a biography of Chester Himes that I just recently finished. Chester Himes, who wrote the Harlem detective novels that the movies Cotton Comes to Harlem and Come Back Charleston Blue were made from. and Malcolm X pops up in this biography a couple times, and Chester Himes had gone to Europe, and Malcolm X, famous by the early '60s, very famous international person, and he traveled to Europe, and Chester Himes lived in Spain and France, expatriate for many years. But they had a similar, they were sort of the same generation, had a similar background, as both had become criminals, had spent years in jail. Chester Himes becoming a writer while he was in jail, a published writer, was writing short stories, and so they hit it off right off the bat. And they weren't talking, you know, black nationalism or they just got along. They had a great sense of humor. Chester Himes had a great sense of humor, as did Malcolm X, evidently in his real life. He can look really severe in some of his speeches, but then in his speeches he has this disarming smile that Denzel Washington picks up on in his incarnation of Malcolm X in his speeches, and you feel there is a feeling there that Malcolm X understands, even though he believes deeply what he's saying, he understands that he is giving a performance, and that his performance is being looked on very differently by a black audience and a white audience. There's this sort of ironic self-awareness that comes through in Malcolm X. And like I say, you see a personal side of Malcolm X, because, like I say, Chester Himes, he didn't believe in any ist. He was often, he was sort of hounded out of America for being a Marxist, but he was very much anti-communist. He didn't feel like any ist, any specific ideology was the way forward for black people. We in the supplements of the movie, and let me show you the packaging here. We have a 4K UHD with commentary, the Blu-ray with commentary, and then a Blu-ray with all the supplements in Dolby Vision. And I mentioned the commentary from the DVD 2005, Spike Lee, Ernest Dickerson, the great cinematographers. This is the last collaboration with Spike Lee. They were fellow students at NYU before Ernest Dickerson became a director himself, editor Barry Brown, and also Ruth Carter, who did the costumes, and they are lifelong collaborators with Spike Lee. We get an archival making of Malcolm X that I guess was made in the early '90s. Then we get some 2022 conversations. One is with Spike Lee and Barry Michael Cooper, who was a journalist at the time of the film was released, and also became a screenwriter. And then a conversation with Delroy Lindo, who plays Malcolm's kind of gangster father figure during his criminal days. And then a 2022 conversation with Terrence Blanchard, who does the music, and Malcolm X has a great score. Then we get a documentary from 1972, and this is entitled Malcolm X, based on the autobiography of Malcolm X, which is, the feature film is also based on the autobiography of Malcolm X, which was really written by Alex Haley from conversations that he had with Malcolm X. Now, the documentary is directed by Arnold Pearl, who also wrote the screenplay for the movie, and it's many different incarnations with different screenwriters like David Mamet and James Baldwin before it eventually gets to Spike Lee. I was just going to sample this because I turned it on right after I finished the movie, so I had a 3-hour and 20-minute movie of Malcolm X. Now, granted, I did take a break in the halfway point, but I started watching the documentary, and I mean, it was as unconventional as Spike Lee's movie was conventional. And I was just mesmerized by it. And seeing Malcolm X, the real Malcolm X, and the speeches, and almost all the speeches in this documentary are in the feature film. But 90 minutes of just, I was just riveted from, and this is after watching a 3-hour, 20-minute movie. And then we do get a booklet, Criterion booklet with an essay by the same Barry Michael Cooper, and different photos from the movie. And then there was a book published in '92 called "By Any Means Necessary: The Trials and Tribulations of the Making of Malcolm X," that Spike Lee put out, and we get excerpts from that. Spike Lee directing Malcolm X, my man. This was a dream project for Spike Lee, so the passion that he brought to the project is certainly in evidence. And then from the same book, we get excerpts from Denzel Washington, a concentrated dose. Denzel Washington on playing Malcolm X. Now, Denzel Washington is nowhere else in the supplements, which was pretty amazing in the making of. This was a project that he worked in a year in preparation, and he does say that after the filming was over, he said, "What am I going to do now? This was the highlight of my career." He was so invested in the movie, in his performance. But I got to say, I would like to have seen a little bit of Denzel Washington in 2022 talking about the film. But a great release from Criterion. They really do the movie proud. And although it's too late for the Criterion Barnes and Noble sale, there will be a flash sale. There usually is sometime in February. And again, the UHD is just magnificent. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.